For more on the latest rounds of sanctions, I'm joined by Job Henning. He is a fellow at the Truman Project, a National Security Institute based here in Washington, D.C. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Elaine.
We've seen sanctions now for months, various sanctions from various countries. First of all, do you think that they've been effective at all? Russia seems to be going business as usual, or at least acting like it. But now we're seeing more banks, state finances, energy companies, arms. Do you think this latest round from the EU and the U.S. will actually have an impact?
Well, this fourth round of escalating sanctions are a big deal. Make no mistake about it. They will have an impact. I think the question is, what are people trying to achieve? And I think from the point of view of changing Russian behavior, I don't think that they're probably going to have a near-term impact. Over the longer period of time, even as early as December, you probably will have some pretty significant economic impacts as you have corporate debt that needs to be rolled over, and with the shortened maturities, that's going to be more difficult to do. But changing behavior around the ceasefire itself, I think, is probably not particularly likely.
We'll talk about the timing of these sanctions coming out, because the ceasefire has been holding despite various reported violations. Do you think that these sanctions will now end that ceasefire?
I think it is an awkward time to introduce the sanctions. The sanctions were discussed in depth at the Wales Summit last week, the NATO Wales Summit. Simultaneous with that, you had the Minsk peace process, or the discussion around what became a roadmap for peace. So it's a little awkward a week later to roll these sanctions out. I think if you look at Putin's comments today, on the one hand, they look sarcastic, as often appears to be the case, saying, you know, maybe someone's opposed to peace. On the other hand, he may actually believe that, thinking that if you presided over and even encouraged Ukraine to go forward with that Minsk peace process, you knew that Russia was present in those eastern territories and wasn't going to change its behavior, and that was part of the peace plan that people signed up to. So I think from the Russian side, there may actually be some genuine puzzlement over the timing of the sanctions.
Well, some would say that it seems that Ukraine and Russia were working things out on their own. The presidents are both speaking. The ceasefire is holding. So why would the EU and the U.S. have to get involved at this point and push forward with those sanctions?
Well, I think it's a good question. I think from the U.S. and the EU's perspective, they're looking at the roadmap to peace signed in Minsk, which does declare the withdrawal forces from eastern Ukraine, both parties, from the Ukrainian forces in these alleged illegal formations. And I think there's the view that the parties should abide by that. I think from the point of view of the Ukrainians themselves, the separatists and the Russians, everyone knew that those were not enforceable provisions. So I think there was no expectation that those would actually be enforced. So there's a little bit of a different set of expectations around what's actually happening, or what should have happened after those were signed.
You mentioned President Putin with some comments that he made. He's said in the past, his government said in the past, that they will respond with their own set of sanctions, if you will. Do you think whatever they decide will be equal to what they were dealt?
Well, they don't have the same leverage over the global economy. They will do something. They have already, of course, in terms of the food import restrictions.
And the airspace, they're threatening airspace.
The airspace is a bigger deal. So the first thing that they've talked about was on used car imports. Well, you know, important, but not a particularly big part of the global economy. There's some discussion about consumer goods, textiles. That's already being touched, I think, through the imports in the food area. So that's an escalation, but it's not a huge market. I think as you move into other things like restrictions or complications around overflights, that becomes a bigger deal. That affects the global economy. The biggest thing, of course, though, is natural gas. So throughout the whole Cold War, or through much of the Cold War, you had this gas pipeline. It was never used for strategic purposes. Now it might be. And if you see the polls, you see the checks over the last day, they've commented they're getting significantly less gas than they've contracted for. The Russians are denying this. It may or may not be true, but it's indicative of the fact that that could be a strategic lever they use. And if you move to that level, then you do have, I think, a very significant set of economic issues in conflict between the EU and Russia, primarily, but also through the airlines affecting the United States.
Last question: yes or no? UN General Assembly meetings convening in just a couple of weeks in New York. Will anything happen there? Anything get accomplished?
I think this will be given a good forum, as it should. That's what the UNGA is for. I think there'll be a lot of discussions around what's transpired. I don't think that there'll be some big breakthrough there, but one should be prepared to be surprised.
All right, Job Henning, as always, we appreciate your insight and your time.
My pleasure.